The verdant hills of Tennessee cradled Oak Ridge Valley like protective hands, shielding the small mining town from the outside world. It was a place where fortune seekers came to mine coal, not gold, where men's voices competed with the constant rumble of mining carts and pickaxes. Here, success announced itself with boisterous laughter in the saloon, with hearty backslaps and confident proclamations. This was no place for stillness, no sanctuary for someone like Emily Barrett. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach wheels kicked up dust as they rolled to a stop. In front of the Oak Ridge Hotel, a sturdy two-story structure that watched over the town entrance like a seasoned guard. Emily Barrett held her small valise close, her slender fingers pressing into the worn fabric. She wore a modest grey dress with a high collar, her auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a simple bonnet. Her eyes, hazel with flecks of gold, remained lowered until the very last moment when the driver called out, "Oak Ridge Valley, final stop." Only then did she look up, drawing a deep breath that did little to ease the fluttering in her stomach. The other passengers had already descended, stretching their limbs after the grueling 3-day journey from Charleston. Emily waited until everyone had departed before rising, smoothing her skirts with trembling hands. "End of the line, miss," the driver said, offering a calloused hand to help her down. Emily nodded silently and accepted his assistance, stepping carefully onto the main street of Oak Ridge Valley. The town's vitality immediately overwhelmed her senses. Miners trudged toward the boarding house, merchants shouted about their wares, and children darted between wagon wheels. The cacophony of sound made Emily instinctively draw her shoulders inward, as if trying to make herself invisible in the crowd. "Must be her," a woman's voice cut through the noise. "Lord, she's plain as wheat flour. Thought William would have picked himself a woman with more presence." "Probably all he could get, sending for a bride through the mail," another replied. Carelessly, Emily pretended not to hear, though a flush crept up her neck. She'd anticipated whispers, but not such boldness, especially before she'd even met Mr. Blackwood. The thought of him sent her hand to her pocket, feeling for the folded letter that had brought her across half the country. William Blackwood, widower, age 40, mine foreman at Oak Ridge Coal Company, seeking a respectable wife to manage household affairs and provide companionship. The advertisement had been direct, practical, just like her response. She scanned the busy street, searching for someone who might be William Blackwood. His letter had promised he'd meet her, but no one approached. Minutes ticked by while curious. Glances multiplied around her. Emily remained standing straight, her valise by her feet, trying to quell the growing anxiety in her chest. "Miss Barrett," the voice came from behind her, deep and impatient. Emily turned to find a tall, broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and stern eyes. His suit was of good quality but dusty, as if he'd hurried from important business. "Yes," she answered, the single word barely audible even to her own ears. She extended her hand formally, where it hung awkwardly between them. William Blackwood studied her face, then her hand, then her face again. His expression remained unreadable as he gave her fingers a perfunctory shake. "You're quiet," he stated bluntly. Emily nodded, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite the desire to look away. "Your letters were different," he continued, frowning. "More expressive. Can you speak properly?" Yes, Mr. Blackwood," Emily replied, making herself project her voice. "I can speak. I simply prefer not to when it isn't necessary." His frown deepened, creating furrows between his brows. "Everything here requires communication, Miss Barrett. A mining town needs voices, strong ones. The wagon's this way." He turned without waiting for a response, motioning for a boy to handle her trunk. Emily followed, her steps measured, ignoring the stares that tracked her progress down the dusty main street. The wagon ride to Blackwood House was uncomfortable, in every sense. The rough bench offered little cushioning against the rutted road, but the silence between them was even more jarring. Twice William began to speak, only to fall quiet when Emily's responses came soft and brief. The questions he asked required simple answers, and simple answers were what she gave. "Why did you answer my advertisement?" he finally asked as they passed the last buildings of the town proper. Emily watched the landscape unfold before them. Dense forests climbing steep hills, a narrow river winding through the valley below. "I needed somewhere to go," she answered honestly. "My mother passed away last autumn. The library where I worked closed. Your letter offered purpose." "You worked in a library?" Something like hope flickered across his face. "Yes, for 7 years. Then you can't be too quiet among patrons requesting books." "People in libraries respect silence," she replied, her voice gaining a hint of warmth for the first time. "They understand when words aren't needed." The hope in William's expression faded. "Well, we're not in a library here, Miss Barrett. Oakridge needs a woman who can hold her own, speak up at company gatherings, charm investors. The mine is expanding, and I need a wife who can help advance my position with the right social touches." Emily's hands tightened in her lap. "Your letter mentioned companionship and household management, not social diplomacy." William exhaled sharply. "Perhaps I wasn't clear enough, or perhaps you didn't read carefully enough." They crested a hill, and Blackwood House came into view. A handsome 2-story home, built of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around 2 sides. It should have felt welcoming, but to Emily, it suddenly seemed like a stage where she would be expected to perform a role she'd never auditioned for. "It's not too late," William said, slowing the horses. "The stage returns east tomorrow. I can arrange your passage." Emily stared at the house, then at the wilderness surrounding it. She was 500 miles from anything familiar, with barely enough money for a week's lodging, let alone a return ticket to Charleston. "You're sending me away because I'm quiet?" "I'm being practical, Miss Barrett. I need a wife who can command attention, someone people will listen to, someone who speaks with authority when I'm in meetings or down in the mines. You," he gestured vaguely toward her, "you're hardly more than a whisper. Oakridge would swallow you whole." The wagon rolled to a stop before the house. A middle-aged woman emerged onto the porch, drying her hands on her apron, curiosity evident in her stance. "That's Mrs. Parker, my housekeeper," William explained. "She'll fix us dinner and you can stay the night. I'll have you back to town in the morning." Emily didn't move. "You haven't even given me a chance. I don't need to waste time on what I already know won't work." His voice wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "Better to send you home now than let you struggle here." "I have no home to return to, Mr. Blackwood." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Then I'll advance you enough for lodging in town until you find something else. I'm not heartless, Miss Barrett, just practical." The word struck her like a physical blow. Practical. It was what she had always prided herself on being. Practical, sensible Emily Barrett, who never raised her voice, never demanded attention. And now her practicality had become her undoing. She stepped down from the wagon without assistance, straightening her spine and lifting her chin. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of this man who had judged her so quickly. "Mrs. Parker," William called out, "we have a guest for dinner and the night. Miss Barrett will be returning to town tomorrow." The housekeeper's face registered surprise, then understanding, then pity. Emily felt each emotion like a lash against her dignity. "You never mentioned in your advertisement that you required a performer, Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice still quiet but edged with newfound resolve. "Perhaps you should specify that in your next one, to spare the next woman the journey." For the first time, William Blackwood looked genuinely discomfited. He cleared his throat, adjusted his collar, and finally nodded. "Perhaps I should. Now, shall we go inside? It's been a long day for us both." As she followed him up the steps to a house that would never be hers, Emily felt something shift within her. She had traveled west seeking purpose, stability, a place to belong. Instead, she had found rejection before she had even had a chance to prove herself. Tomorrow, she would be back in Oakridge, alone, without prospects or connections, because in a town that valued noise above all else, her quiet nature was considered a fatal flaw. But Oakridge Valley was about to learn that silence held a power all its own. Dawn broke over the hills in ribbons of pink and gold, light spilling across Oakridge's uneven rooftops like watercolor on parchment. Emily stood on the hotel's small balcony, watching as the town gradually stirred to life. A night of fitful sleep had left shadows beneath her eyes, but her resolve had only strengthened with the rising sun. William Blackwood had been true to his word. He delivered her to the Miners' Rest Hotel with enough money for 2 weeks' lodging and a terse apology. Then he'd vanished back to his grand house on the hill, leaving Emily to contemplate her future in a town that had already decided she didn't belong. The hotel proprietress, Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, was a shrewd woman with silver streaks dark hair and nimble hands. She'd looked Emily up and down when she arrived the previous evening, taking in her simple dress and single trunk. "Another bride that didn't take?" she'd asked bluntly. "Blackwood's not the first to send 'em back. Won't be. The last either." Now, observing the street come to life, Emily knew she had exactly 14 days to find a purpose in Oakridge, or face the prospect of becoming truly destitute in a town where she knew no one. She clutched a small notebook, several possibilities, already listed in her neat handwriting. The schoolhouse was her first choice. Her experience with organization and literature might serve her well there. If not, perhaps one of the shops needed assistance, or a family required a governess. Oakridge was growing. Surely there was a place for someone willing to work hard, even if she wasn't one for idle chatter. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped back inside to prepare for the day ahead. She had never been one to surrender, and she wouldn't start now, not even in a town that seemed to value volume over substance. Oakridge Valley had rejected her for her quietness, but perhaps it was about to discover that the most profound truths were often spoken in the softest voices. Emily Barrett smoothed her skirt and tucked a stray auburn strand behind her ear before stepping into Oakridge Valley's modest schoolhouse. The morning air carried a hint of coal dust, inevitable in a mining town, but also the sweet scent of pine from the surrounding forest. She had spent all morning gathering her courage, rehearsing what she might say to the schoolteacher about potential employment. The schoolhouse door creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a scene of barely contained chaos. Nearly 30 children of various ages scattered throughout the room, some attempting their lessons, others chasing each other between desks, while a frazzled young woman tried desperately to restore order. Arithmetic books opened to page 32. The teacher called over the din. "Joseph Miller, put that frog outside this instant. Sarah, stop pulling on Annie's braids." The woman, clearly the teacher, was perhaps a few years younger than Emily, with flushed cheeks and desperation in her eyes. She glanced up as Emily entered, relief washing over her face at the sight of another adult, preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Oh, thank goodness. Are you the school board representative? I've been begging for an assistant for months." Emily shook her head, but before she could speak, the teacher continued, words tumbling out in a breathless rush. "I'm Margaret Winters. I have 34 students across 6 grades, and I'm expected to manage them all while preparing them for examinations and teaching them proper deportment. It's impossible, simply impossible." A paper airplane sailed across the room, narrowly, missing Margaret's head. "David Porter, that will be enough." Emily surveyed the chaos, noting the mixture of boredom and mischief on the children's faces. Without thinking, she moved to the teacher's desk and picked up a small brass bell. She rang it 3 times, clear, musical tones that cut through. The noise, the unexpected sound captured the children's attention. 34 pairs of eyes turned toward her, curious about this stranger who had appeared in their classroom. Emily set down the bell and lifted her hands. She made a gentle gesture of placing her finger to her lips, then moved both hands downward in a calming motion. Next she pointed to her eyes, then to her ears, and finally folded her hands peacefully before her. The children stared, transfixed by the silent communication. One by one they quieted, returning to their seats with only occasional whispers. "How did you do that?" Margaret whispered, astonished. "Movement catches attention more than shouting ever will," Emily replied softly. "Children respond to novelty." Margaret gaped at her, then at the now attentive classroom. Are you looking for employment, Miss Barrett?" "Emily Barrett. And yes, I am." Margaret's expression transformed into one of desperate hope. "Miss Barrett, I don't care if you never speak above a whisper for the rest of your days. If you can keep these children in order, I'll hire you on the spot." She lowered her voice further. "The pay isn't much, mind you, but there's a small room above the general store that the previous assistant rented. I can speak to Mr. Henderson about it." For the first time since arriving in Oak Ridge Valley, Emily felt a genuine smile touch her lips. "I accept." The morning passed in a blur of activity as Emily settled into her new role. Margaret assigned her the younger children, those in their first and second years of schooling, while she focused on the older students. Emily's group sat in a semicircle at the back of the room, their small faces upturned and attentive as she taught them their letters and numbers. When she spoke, it was in a gentle but clear voice that never rose above conversational level. When a child grew restless, she would change activities, incorporating motion and gestures that captivated their attention. By midday, they were calling her Miss Emily and competing to sit closest to her during lessons. "You're a natural with them," Margaret commented during the lunch hour as the children played in the schoolyard under the watchful eye of an older student. "Where did you learn those hand movements?" Emily hesitated, unused to sharing personal details. But Margaret's interest seemed genuine, without the judgment she'd faced from others. "My mother ran a small children's section in the Charleston Library where I worked," she explained. "She believed children learned better when engaged, with more than just words. When she fell ill, I took over her storytelling circles." "And the children respond to your quietness," Margaret observed. "It makes them lean in, pay attention." "Yes," Emily agreed, thinking of William Blackwood and his immediate dismissal, though not everyone sees it that way. By the time school ended that afternoon, Emily's voice was tired from more use than it had seen in months, but her heart felt lighter. As the last student departed, Margaret showed her to Mr. Henderson's general store to inquire about the room. The store owner, a balding man with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands from the bakery section he ran at the back, greeted them warmly. "So, you're our new teaching assistant? That's wonderful news. The room's been empty since Miss Pearson married last spring. It's small but clean with its own entrance at the back staircase." The room was indeed modest, just space for a narrow bed, a washstand, a small table with 2 chairs, and a trunk for belongings. But the window overlooked the rolling hills beyond town, and the afternoon light filled the space with golden warmth. "It's perfect," Emily assured him, already envisioning how she would arrange her few possessions in this place that was now hers. After arranging to move her trunk from the hotel, Emily returned to the Miner's Rest to settle her account. Mrs. Walsh seemed surprised by the news of her employment at the schoolhouse. "Well, I'll be. Didn't think Margaret needed help." She gave Emily a shrewd look. Though I suppose if anyone could wrangle those wild children, it might be someone who doesn't try to outshout them. Emily offered a small smile, but didn't respond to the backhanded compliment. She paid for her single night's stay, then requested directions to someone who might transport her trunk to her new lodgings. There's Fletcher's delivery service down the street, Mrs. Walsh suggested, though he charges a pretty penny even for short trips. Is there perhaps another option? Emily asked, conscious of her limited funds. Mrs. Walsh hesitated, then lowered her voice. Well, there's Mason's place at the edge of town. He runs the carpentry shop and sometimes does odd jobs. Might haul your trunk for a fair price. She paused. He's different, though. Keeps to himself. Deaf as stone since the mine collapse 3 years back. Emily's head snapped up. A deaf carpenter? Strange, ain't it? How a man who can't hear makes such beautiful furniture. But he does. Good work, I'll give him that. Just don't expect conversation. For the first time since arriving in Oakridge Valley, Emily felt a flutter of genuine interest. Where can I find this Mr. Mason? Following Mrs. Walsh's directions, Emily made her way to the far edge of town, where the buildings thinned and the forested hillside encroached. The steady rhythm of a hammer on wood guided her to a large workshop with wide doors open to catch the afternoon breeze. As she approached, she could make out a tall figure inside, bent over a workbench. A man stood with his back to her, one arm raising and lowering a mallet in precise strokes as he chiseled intricate details into what appeared to be a headboard. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing muscular forearms dusted with sawdust and marked with old scars. The man continued his work, unaware of her presence. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped fully into the workshop, moving carefully into his line of sight while staying well away from his work area. The carpenter looked up, his tool pausing mid-stroke. His eyes, a striking shade of blue-gray, widened slightly at the sight of her, then narrowed in question. He set down his chisel and straightened, his expression guarded but not unwelcoming. Ethan Mason was not what Emily had expected. His face was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 35, with strong features softened by thoughtful eyes. A jagged scar ran across his right temple, disappearing into his sandy brown hair. His beard was neatly trimmed, giving him a distinguished appearance despite his workman's clothes. Emily realized she'd been staring and quickly gathered her thoughts. She reached into her reticule and withdrew a small notepad and pencil that she carried from her library days. She wrote quickly, then held up the pad. Hello, my name is Emily Barrett. I'm new to town. I need help moving my trunk to new lodgings. Ethan studied the note, then looked at her face with a searching gaze. After a moment, he nodded and held out his hand for the pad and pencil. His handwriting was surprisingly elegant as he wrote, Ethan Mason, I can help. When? Today, if possible, Emily wrote back. From the Miners' Rest Hotel to the room above. Henderson's store. A smile touched the corner of his mouth as he wrote, New school teacher? Assistant, she corrected on paper. Just hired today. He nodded, seeming to approve. I'll finish this section, he wrote, gesturing to the headboard, then bring my wagon, 30 minutes. What's your fee? Emily asked, suddenly conscious of her limited funds. Ethan considered the question, then wrote, First time welcome to Oakridge. No charge. Emily shook her head firmly and wrote, I insist on paying something fair. He studied her for a moment, respect flickering in his eyes. Finally he wrote, 1 dozen fresh cookies from Henderson's bakery. I have a weakness for ginger snaps. The simple request, both fair and slightly whimsical, made Emily smile. She nodded and wrote, Deal. Ginger snaps it is. As promised, Ethan arrived at the hotel 30 minutes later with a well-maintained wagon. Despite Mrs. Walsh's obvious curiosity, Emily offered no explanation for her arrangement with the town's deaf carpenter. She simply directed him to her. trunk, which he lifted with impressive ease. The ride to Henderson's store was brief but pleasant. Though they couldn't converse while he drove, the silence felt comfortable rather than strained. Emily found herself observing how attuned Ethan was to his surroundings, the way his eyes constantly scanned the street, noticing details others might miss. He navigated through town with confidence, nodding greetings to those they passed, while expertly avoiding the ruts in the road. At the store, Ethan carried her trunk up the back stairs to her new room, setting it precisely where she indicated. Emily went downstairs to purchase the promised ginger snaps, returning to find Ethan examining the room's small table, which wobbled on uneven legs. Without a word, he knelt beside it, pulled a small wedge of wood from his pocket, and fixed the wobble in seconds. When he stood, Emily handed him the paper-wrapped cookies and a note. "Thank you for your help in the repair." He accepted both with a nod, then hesitated before writing on her pad. "Most newcomers avoid me. Easier that way, I suppose." The simple statement, devoid of self-pity yet tinged with resignation, struck Emily deeply. She wrote back, "I'm familiar with being avoided for being difficult. People often mistake quietness for emptiness." Something like recognition flashed in his eyes. He wrote, "Yet here you are, teaching children." "And here you are," she responded. "On paper, creating beautiful things that speak for themselves." A genuine smile transformed his serious face. He tucked the cookies carefully into his jacket pocket and wrote one last note before leaving. "Welcome to Oakridge, Emily Barrett. Not everyone here measures worth by volume." As she watched him descend the stairs to his wagon, Emily felt something she hadn't expected to find in Oakridge Valley, a sense of possibility. In a town dominated by the loud industry of coal mining, she had found unexpected common ground with a man who lived in perpetual silence. They were both outsiders, both misunderstood, and perhaps both stronger than Oakridge gave them credit for. The next few weeks established a new pattern in Emily's life. Her days were filled with teaching, her rapport with the children growing, stronger as they responded to her gentle but firm guidance. Margaret marveled at how Emily could maintain order without raising her voice, often commenting that she wished she had the same gift. "It's not a gift," Emily explained during their planning session one afternoon. "Children mirror the energy we present. When we're frantic, they become frantic. When we're calm, they find calm." Word of Emily's effectiveness with the children spread through town, and soon mothers began to stop by the schoolhouse after hours, seeking advice on managing their more spirited offspring. Emily found herself conducting informal parenting discussions in her small room above the store, her quiet voice and practical suggestions building her a reputation quite different from the too quiet mail-order bride who had arrived just weeks earlier. On Saturdays, Emily developed a habit of visiting Ethan's workshop. The first time, she brought a chair with a broken spindle from her room as an excuse. The second time, she came with questions about building bookshelves for the schoolhouse. By the third visit, they had established a comfortable rhythm, exchanging notes and sharing the simple pleasure of quiet company. Emily would bring a book and sit in the corner of his workshop, reading while he worked. Occasionally she would show him a passage that delighted her, or he would call her over to see a particularly intricate piece of joinery. Their communication, limited to written notes and expressive glances, developed a depth that surprised them both. Through these notes, Emily learned Ethan's story bit by bit. He had been a farmer's son from Pennsylvania, apprenticed to a master. Carpenter before coming west to seek his fortune. The mine collapse that took his hearing had killed 12 men. He had been one of only 3 survivors, pulled from the rubble after 2 days trapped in darkness. "People think I'm slow-witted because I don't speak," he wrote one afternoon. "Easier to let them think that than try to explain." "I understand," Emily responded. "When you're quiet, people fill the silence with their own assumptions." He nodded, a look of profound recognition in his eyes. Why did Blackwood reject you? He wrote suddenly. Really? Emily considered the question, composing her answer carefully before writing. He wanted a woman who could charm investors and command social gatherings, someone whose voice would echo his importance. I'm not that woman. Ethan's expression darkened. He took the pencil, his strokes firm against the paper. His loss. The simple sentiment warmed her more than it should have. As autumn painted the Tennessee hills in gold and crimson, Emily's place in the community gradually shifted. Parents noted their children's progress under her guidance, particularly the previously troublesome ones who responded to her quiet, firm approach. Even William Blackwood, when he encountered her at Henderson's store one afternoon, seemed taken aback by the respectful greetings she received from townsfolk who had previously dismissed her. "You seem to have found your place, Miss Barrett," he commented stiffly. "Yes," she replied simply, "it seems I have." His gaze lingered on her face, perhaps searching for resentment, but finding only serene confidence. He nodded once and moved on, leaving Emily with the satisfying realization that his opinion no longer mattered to her. Oakridge Valley was becoming home, not because she had changed to suit it, but because she had found her own quiet way to belong. What she didn't notice as she continued her shopping was William Blackwood's thoughtful frown as he watched her go, or the way his eyes followed her progress down the street, a man suddenly wondering if perhaps he had been too hasty in his judgment. October arrived in Oakridge Valley with crisp mornings and early frosts that transformed the forest into a tapestry of amber and scarlet. The school windows remained open during daylight hours to catch the last warmth of autumn, before winter's chill necessitated constant fires in the pot-bellied stove. During afternoon lessons, Emily worked with the children on a special project, creating illustrated alphabet cards that paired written letters with simple hand gestures she had designed. What had begun as a method to maintain classroom order had evolved into something more comprehensive. "Watch how A looks like this," she demonstrated, forming the letter shape with her fingers, "and B curves twice, like this." The children mimicked her movements enthusiastically, delighting in the novelty of talking with hands, as they called it. Even Margaret had begun incorporating these gestures into her lessons with the older students, finding that the physical component helped reinforce their spelling and reading. "You know," Margaret commented as they tidied the classroom after dismissal, "Timothy Watkins has improved remarkably since we started using your hand letters. His mother says he practices them constantly at home." Emily nodded, pleased but not surprised. Timothy had struggled with traditional reading methods since she arrived. Some children learn better through movement than stillness. His mind connects to his hands more readily than to his eyes alone. "Where did you develop this approach? I've never seen anything like it in any teaching manual." Emily hesitated, arranging the inkwells in perfect alignment before answering. "I created something similar for a young deaf girl who visited our library in Charleston. She couldn't hear the stories during reading hour, so I developed gestures to help her follow along." She smiled at the memory. Soon the other children wanted to learn them too. "You should share this method more widely," Margaret urged. "The school board meets next month. Perhaps you could demonstrate." The suggestion sent a flutter of anxiety through Emily's chest. Standing before the town's officials, including William Blackwood, who served as the mine's representative, was far different from teaching children. Yet the idea of formalizing her approach held undeniable appeal. "I'll consider it," she promised, though uncertainty colored her voice. Later that evening, Emily brought the matter to Ethan during her regular Saturday visit to his workshop. He was crafting delicate wooden toys for the upcoming harvest festival, his large hands surprisingly dexterous as they shaped miniature animals. "The school board wants me to present my teaching method," she wrote on their shared slate. "I'm not sure I should." Ethan looked up from the tiny deer he was sanding, his eyes questioning. "Blackwood sits on the board," she explained further. "It would be uncomfortable." Understanding dawned in his expression. He wiped his hands and took the chalk. "Because he rejected you?" "Partly," she admitted. "But mostly because I'm not good at public speaking. The irony isn't lost on me." Ethan's silent laugh was visible in the crinkling around his eyes. He wrote, "Your methods work. The children prove it. Show them instead of telling them." His pragmatic suggestion sparked an idea. Emily's face brightened as she scribbled excitedly, "I could bring some students to demonstrate, actions instead of speeches." Ethan nodded approvingly, then hesitated before adding, "I have something for you." He moved to a covered shape in the corner of his workshop and pulled away the cloth. Beneath it stood a wooden display stand with multiple panels that could be flipped like the pages of a book. Each panel was divided into segments, perfectly, sized for Emily's alphabet cards. "I noticed your cards always get mixed up," he wrote. "Thought this might help." Emily stared at the beautiful creation, touched by the thoughtfulness behind it. The wood was polished to a warm glow, the edges carved with delicate leaf patterns. Each panel moved smoothly on carefully crafted hinges. "It's perfect," she whispered aloud, forgetting momentarily that he couldn't hear her. She quickly wrote her thanks on the slate, adding, "I can't accept such a gift without payment." Ethan shook his head firmly and wrote, "Not a gift, an investment in children's education." Emily ran her fingers over the smooth wood, an idea forming. "Would you bring this to the school board meeting? We could present together, show how your craftsmanship and my teaching methods create something greater than either alone." Surprise flashed across his face, followed by uncertainty. He rarely attended town gatherings where communication was difficult and stares were common. "I know it's asking a lot," Emily wrote, understanding his hesitation, "but perhaps it's time Oakridge saw what can be accomplished in silence." After a long moment, Ethan nodded slowly, a determined set to his jaw. He wrote, "Together, then." The exchange sealed more than their presentation plans. In that moment, they formed an alliance of two souls who had found strength in what others perceived as limitation. It was a partnership neither had expected to find in Oakridge Valley. Word of Emily's teaching methods had already spread beyond her students' families. On Sunday after church services, Mrs. Henderson approached her on the chapel steps. "Miss Barrett, I've heard such wonderful things about your work with the children," the baker's wife said warmly. "My nephew is visiting from Knoxville next month. He's a teacher at the state school and very interested in new approaches. Would you mind if he observed your classroom while he's here?" "Not at all," Emily replied, pleasantly surprised by the request. "We welcome visitors any time." As Emily walked back to her room, she noticed William Blackwood watching her from across the street. Their eyes met briefly before he tipped his hat in a formal acknowledgement and turned away. The gesture was small but significant, a recognition she had not received when she first arrived. That afternoon, a knock at her door revealed young Lily Porter, one of her students, clutching a folded note. "Ma sent this for you, Miss Emily," the child said, her eyes bright with mystery. The invitation was unexpected. Mrs. Porter, wife of the mine's accountant, was hosting a ladies' quilting circle the following Saturday and requested Emily's company. "The children speak so highly of you," the note read. "It's time we became better acquainted." Emily had received no social invitations since arriving in Oakridge. Women's gatherings typically centered around lively conversation, precisely the environment where her quietness became most apparent. Yet refusing would only reinforce her isolation. "Please tell your mother I would be delighted," she told Lily, who skipped away happily with the message. The Porter home was one of the finest in Oakridge, a testament to Mr. Porter's position with the mining company. The parlor was already filled with the town's prominent women when Emily arrived, their chatter flowing as freely as the tea being poured. "Miss Barrett, do come in," Mrs. Porter greeted her warmly. "Ladies, for those who haven't met her, this is our new teaching assistant who has worked wonders with the children." Emily smiled politely as introductions were made, including Mrs. Blackwood, William's widowed mother, a dignified woman with silver-streaked hair and shrewd eyes that assessed Emily carefully. "So you're the young lady who was to be my daughter-in-law," she said directly, causing several women to exchange glances. "William mentioned you'd found a position at the school." "Yes, ma'am," Emily replied simply, refusing to be disconcerted. "I've been very fortunate." "Fortunate indeed," Mrs. Porter interjected. "My Lily couldn't read a word before Miss Barrett started working with her. Now she reads to us every evening." Several other mothers offered similar praise, describing improvements in their children's studies. Emily listened graciously, offering quiet thanks for their kind words while keeping her attention on the quilt square she'd been given to stitch. "What I find most fascinating," Mrs. Henderson added, "is this system of hand signs she's developed. Lily showed us last night, spelling her name with her fingers. Quite remarkable." "Hand signs?" Mrs. Blackwood's eyebrows rose. "Like those used for the deaf?" "Similar in concept," Emily explained, setting down her needle to demonstrate, "but simplified for teaching letters and reading. Children remember better when movement accompanies learning." "Would you show us?" Mrs. Porter asked. "I've been trying to follow Lily's explanations, but I'm afraid I'm rather hopeless." Emily hesitated only briefly before demonstrating several simple letter signs. To her surprise, the women set aside their sewing to mimic her movements, their initial awkwardness giving way to laughter and genuine interest. "I see why the children enjoy this so much," Mrs. Henderson said. "It's rather like a game, isn't it? A game with purpose," Emily agreed. By the time refreshments were served, Emily had taught the quilting circle the hand signs for the entire alphabet. What had begun as a demonstration had transformed into an impromptu lesson, with the women practicing words and challenging each other to spell increasingly difficult terms. "You must present this method at the next Ladies' Auxiliary meeting," Mrs. Porter insisted. "The other school districts should hear about this." "Miss Barrett will be presenting to the school board next month," Mrs. Henderson informed them. "My husband says they're quite interested in her approach." "As they should be," Mrs. Blackwood said unexpectedly. "Innovation seldom arrives in such a palatable package." She fixed Emily with a direct look. "You've surprised us, Miss Barrett. I suspect my son is reconsidering his hasty judgment." Emily maintained her composure, though the comment sent a ripple of whispers through the group. "My focus is on the children's education, Mrs. Blackwood, nothing more." The older woman's lips curved slightly, as it should be. As Emily walked home that evening, she marveled at the shift in her circumstances. In just over a month, she had gone from rejected bride to respected teacher, from outsider to invited guest. Her quietness, once deemed her greatest flaw, had become part of her unique contribution to Oakridge Valley. The following week brought an unexpected visitor to the schoolhouse. Emily was working with her young pupils on their reading when the door opened to admit William Blackwood. The children immediately straightened in their seats, aware of the mine foreman's importance in their small community. "Mr. Blackwood," Margaret greeted him with surprise. "What brings you to our school?" "Official business, Miss Winters," he replied, his gaze moving to Emily. "The school board has requested an advanced demonstration of Miss Barrett's teaching methods before next month's formal presentation. If it's convenient, I'd like to observe today's lessons." Emily nodded calmly, though her heart quickened at this sudden scrutiny. "We're practicing reading with hand signs, Mr. Blackwood. You're welcome to observe." William took a seat at the back of the room, his tall frame awkward in the child-sized chair. Emily turned her attention back to her students, determined not to let his presence disrupt their routine. "Now, children, let's read this sentence together," she instructed, pointing to the chalkboard where she had written, The quick fox jumps over the lazy dog. As the children read aloud, their hands formed the corresponding signs for each letter, their movements synchronized in a dance of language. Emily moved among them, gently correcting when needed, praising when deserved. William watched with undisguised fascination. When the youngest child, barely 5 years old, successfully spelled fox with both voice and fingers, a look of genuine amazement crossed his face. After the lesson concluded, the children were released for their midday meal. William approached. Emily's desk, his usual brusqueness tempered with something new, respect. "I didn't understand when we first met," he said without preamble. "I mistook your quietness for weakness." Emily looked up at him steadily. "Many people do." "The board is impressed with the children's progress under your guidance. The parents, even more so." He cleared his throat. "I was wrong in my assessment of you, Miss Barrett. I ask your forgiveness." The apology was unexpected, and Emily took a moment to consider her response. "There's nothing to forgive, Mr. Blackwood. We had different expectations. Nevertheless, I judged hastily and incorrectly." He hesitated. "I've written to the mail-order bride agency, asking them to remove my advertisement." Emily raised an eyebrow, uncertain why he was sharing this information. "I realized," he continued, "that I was seeking qualities that don't truly matter, volume over substance." A self-deprecating smile briefly crossed his face. "Perhaps I've been too long in a profession where one must shout to be heard." "Perhaps," Emily agreed, neither accepting nor rejecting his implied overture. William nodded, accepting her measured response. "The board looks forward to your full presentation next month. Good day, Miss Barrett." After he departed, Margaret rushed to Emily's side, her eyes wide with speculation. "Did William Blackwood just apologize to you? And was that an attempt at—" "It was an acknowledgement of professional respect," Emily interrupted gently, "nothing more." But as she organized her teaching materials, Emily couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically her position had changed. The very man who had deemed her unsuitable for Oakridge was now acknowledging her value to the community. It was a vindication she had not sought but found strangely hollow. That Saturday, Emily arrived at Ethan's workshop earlier than usual, eager to share the week's developments. She found him outside, splitting logs for winter with powerful, precise swings of his axe. He looked up at her approach, a smile warming his face as he set aside his tool and wiped his brow. Inside, as they shared tea from the pot he kept warming, on his small stove, Emily recounted both the quilting circle's interest in her teaching methods and William's unexpected visit. "He apologized," she wrote on their slate. "After rejecting me as his bride, he now seems to be reconsidering." Ethan's expression remained carefully neutral as he read her words, but she noticed how his fingers tightened slightly around his mug. After a moment he wrote, "Will you accept if he offers again?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Emily studied Ethan's face, the strong features that had become dear to her, the expressive eyes that communicated. So much without sound, the quiet dignity that matched her own reserved nature. "No," she wrote simply. "Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt." Relief flickered across his features before he could mask it. He took the chalk and hesitated, seeming to debate with himself before writing, "I'm glad." 2 words, yet they shifted something fundamental between them. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks as their eyes met over the slate. For a moment neither moved to write anything more, the silence between them more eloquent than words. Finally, Ethan added, "The Harvest Festival is next weekend. Would you attend with me?" The Harvest Festival was Oakridge's largest social event of the year, a public gathering where arriving together would signify a formal understanding between them. Emily knew that accepting would generate talk throughout the valley, yet she found herself nodding without hesitation. "Yes," she wrote, "I would like that very much." The smile that transformed his face was worth any gossip their appearance might inspire. In that moment, Emily realized that she had found much more than employment or community in Oak Ridge Valley. In this town that had initially rejected her for being too quiet, she had found someone who cherished her silence as perfect harmony to his own. The Harvest Festival transformed Oak Ridge Valley's town square into a celebration of autumn bounty. Stalls overflowed with produce from surrounding farms. Crafters displayed their wares, and musicians tuned their instruments on a small wooden platform. Children darted between displays, their laughter rising above the general hum of conversation. Emily adjusted the collar of her best dress, a deep blue that complemented her auburn hair, which she had left partially unpinned for the occasion. Her small looking-glass reflected a woman she barely recognized, cheeks flushed with anticipation, eyes bright with confidence that hadn't existed when she first arrived in Oak Ridge. A knock at her door announced Ethan's arrival. He stood on the landing in a pressed shirt and clean jacket, his sandy hair neatly combed. In his hands, he held a small wooden box. "You look beautiful," Emily signed, having practiced the gesture specifically for today. Surprise and delight crossed his face as he recognized her meaning. He nodded appreciatively at her appearance before holding out the box. Inside nestled a delicate wooden pendant on a leather cord. The pendant was carved in the shape of an open book, with tiny letter shapes adorning its pages. Their shared language of education and communication transformed into art. "Did you make this?" Emily whispered, forgetting momentarily that he couldn't hear her. Ethan nodded, then reached into his pocket for the slate they used for communication. "For you," he wrote, "if you'd like to wear it." Emily immediately slipped the cord over her head, the pendant resting perfectly at the hollow of her throat. "It's beautiful," she wrote. "I'll treasure it always." His smile conveyed more than words ever could as he offered his arm to escort her down to the festival. Their arrival together drew notice, though most reactions were more curious than critical. Emily had become a respected figure through her work with the children, and Ethan, while still considered unusual, was valued for his craftsmanship. Still, the sight of the quiet schoolteacher and the deaf carpenter walking arm in arm generated whispers that rippled through the crowd. "Don't mind them," Mrs. Henderson said warmly as they stopped at her bakery stall. "Folks here will talk about anything new until it becomes old news." She handed them each a spiced apple tart. "On the house, for my favorite tenants." They thanked her and continued their circuit of the festival, pausing to admire crafts and produce. At the children's display, Emily's students proudly showed off their alphabet cards and demonstrated their hand signs for Ethan, who responded with encouraging smiles and careful attention. The day unfolded pleasantly until they reached the auction platform where various donations were being sold to benefit the church roof fund. William Blackwood stood among the organizers, directing the arrangement of items. His gaze found Emily and Ethan, lingering on their linked arms and the pendant at Emily's throat. Something shifted in his expression, a tightening around his eyes, a hardening of his jaw. "Let's view the musical performances," Emily suggested through a quick note, sensing sudden tension. Ethan nodded, seemingly relieved to move away from Blackwood's scrutiny. They found a spot at the edge of the crowd gathered before the musicians' platform. Though Ethan couldn't hear the fiddles and banjos, he could feel their vibrations through the wooden planks beneath his feet, and he watched with evident enjoyment as dancers whirled in traditional patterns. "Would you like to try?" Emily wrote, surprising herself with her boldness. Ethan's eyebrows rose, but after a moment's hesitation, he nodded. They joined the circle dance, Ethan following Emily's lead and the visual cues of other dancers. His movements were slightly delayed, but remarkably graceful for a man who couldn't hear the music. Emily found herself laughing with genuine delight as they turned and stepped together, connected by more than just their joined hands. From the edge of the dancing area, William Blackwood watched their participation with an increasingly troubled expression. When the dance concluded, he approached them directly, his manner formal but determined. "Miss Barrett, Mr. Mason," he greeted them with a slight bow. "I hope you're enjoying the festival." Emily nodded politely. "Very much, thank you." "Excellent. I wonder if I might have a word with you privately, Miss Barrett? School board business." Ethan, reading Blackwood's lips, frowned slightly. Emily touched his arm reassuringly before writing quickly on her small notepad, "I'll be just a moment." Blackwood led her to a quieter spot near the church steps. "I've been meaning to speak with you before the board meeting," he began. "There's been a development regarding your teaching presentation." "Oh." Emily kept her expression neutral despite a flicker of apprehension. "Yes. We've had a visitor from the State Education Department, Mr. Gregory Sullivan, who's touring rural schools to assess teaching standards. He arrived yesterday and will be at your presentation." "I see. Thank you for informing me." Blackwood hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. "Sullivan is very traditional in his views. He believes in standardized methods across all schools. Your very unusual approach may not meet with his approval." "My methods have shown results," Emily replied evenly. "The children's progress speaks for itself." "Indeed. However, Sullivan has considerable influence over state funding. His recommendation could affect our school's financial future." Blackwood's tone became persuasive. "It might be wise to postpone your presentation until after his visit. Focus on demonstrating more conventional teaching during his observation." Emily studied his face, noting the calculation behind his apparent concern. "Are you suggesting I hide my teaching methods from an education official?" "I'm suggesting prudence, Miss Barrett, for the good of the school." "And what does Margaret think of this suggestion?" Blackwood shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Winters agrees, and that caution is advisable." Emily doubted this claim, but didn't challenge it directly. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Blackwood, but I believe in the value of my approach. If Mr. Sullivan wishes to observe my actual teaching methods, that's what he should see." A flash of frustration crossed Blackwood's face. "You misunderstand me. This isn't merely a suggestion. As head of the school board, I'm directing you to conduct standard lessons while Sullivan is present. Your hand signs can resume after his departure." The commanding tone he adopted struck Emily as familiar. It was how he had spoken to her that first day, when he had deemed her too quiet to be his wife. The realization strengthened her resolve. "I understand your position, Mr. Blackwood. However, I must teach as I believe best serves the children. If that conflicts with your directives, perhaps we should discuss it with the entire board present." Blackwood's jaw tightened. "You're being obstinate, Miss Barrett. I'm trying to protect the school's interests." "As am I," she replied quietly. Their standoff was interrupted by Ethan's appearance. He approached with a questioning look, clearly concerned by the extended conversation and the tension evident in their postures. "Mr. Mason," Blackwood acknowledged him stiffly. "I was just explaining to Miss Barrett the importance of conventional teaching methods during our upcoming state inspection." Ethan looked to Emily for clarification. She quickly wrote on her notepad, "He wants me to hide my teaching methods from a state official visiting next week." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes, followed by indignation. He took the pencil and wrote firmly, "Her methods work. Why hide them?" "This is a discussion for educators, Mr. Mason," Blackwood replied dismissively, though Ethan read his lips easily enough. "With all due respect, a carpenter has little insight into educational standards." Ethan's expression hardened. He wrote rapidly, "I understand prejudice when I see it." Blackwood flushed at the direct accusation. "This has nothing to do with prejudice. It's about ensuring our school meets state requirements. If my teaching is truly beneficial, shouldn't the State Education Department know about it?" Emily interjected. "Perhaps Mr. Sullivan will see value where you see risk." "You're being naive," Blackwood responded, his frustration evident. "Sullivan represents old-fashioned views that have no room for innovation. He believes children should learn by rote and recitation, not by waving their hands about like—" He stopped abruptly, realizing he had revealed more than intended. "Like what, Mr. Blackwood?" Emily prompted, her voice soft but firm. He cleared his throat. "Like methods better suited to those with special limitations. Sullivan believes standard. Children should be taught by standard means." The implication hung in the air between them. Emily felt Ethan tense beside her, but kept her focus on Blackwood. "Every child has different ways of learning," she said evenly. "My approach benefits all of them, not just those with special limitations, as you put it." "Nevertheless," Blackwood insisted, "I must insist you follow my direction in this matter. The school's funding could depend on it." Before Emily could respond, Mrs. Blackwood appeared at her son's side. "William, you're needed at the auction platform." Her eyes moved between the three of them, assessing the situation with shrewd accuracy. "Is everything all right here?" "Just discussing school business, Mother," William replied smoothly. "On a festival day? How inconsiderate of you." Mrs. Blackwood turned to Emily with a surprisingly warm smile. "My dear, I've been hoping to speak with you. The Ladies' Auxiliary is considering funding new readers for the school. Perhaps you could advise us on what would be most useful." The intervention was clearly deliberate, giving Emily an opportunity to extract herself gracefully from the confrontation. She accepted gratefully, writing a quick note to Ethan that she would rejoin him shortly. Mrs. Blackwood led her toward the church, where several auxiliary members had gathered. Once out of William's earshot, the older woman spoke candidly. "My son can be remarkably stubborn when his authority is questioned, a trait he inherited from his father, I'm afraid. He seems concerned about the state education representatives." "Visit," Emily replied carefully. "Gregory Sullivan?" Mrs. Blackwood waved dismissively. "An old friend of my late husband's. Opinionated, certainly, but not the ogre William makes him out to be. In fact, I've invited him to Sunday dinner tomorrow. Perhaps you would join us as well?" Emily hesitated, surprised by the invitation and suspicious of its timing. "I understand your reluctance," Mrs. Blackwood said perceptively. "But it might be beneficial for Sullivan to meet you in a social setting before evaluating your professional methods. First impressions matter greatly with men like him." The strategic wisdom of this suggestion wasn't lost on Emily. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Blackwood. Call me Eleanor, please. And do consider bringing your friend Mr. Mason as well. I find dinner conversations are always more interesting with diverse perspectives." Emily's eyebrows rose at this unexpected inclusion. "Are you certain? Conversation with Ethan requires written communication." "My dear, I spent 40 years married to a man who bellowed everything because the mines damaged his hearing." "Written. Conversation sounds positively peaceful." Eleanor Blackwood's eyes twinkled with mischief that made her suddenly appear decades younger. "Besides, I understand Mr. Mason is quite articulate on paper." This surprising alliance left Emily momentarily speechless. Eventually she managed, "I'll extend your invitation, though I can't promise he'll accept." "Excellent. 3 o'clock tomorrow. Now let's actually discuss those readers, shall we? I suspect my son will check whether we were truly talking about books." When Emily rejoined Ethan a short while later, she found him sitting alone at the edge of the festival, his expression troubled. She sat beside him and quickly wrote an account of her conversation with Eleanor Blackwood, including the dinner invitation. "A trap," Ethan wrote after reading her note. "I don't think so," Emily replied. "Mrs. Blackwood seems genuinely interested in fair treatment, and meeting this education official socially might help our cause." Ethan considered this, then wrote, "What does William really want? Why oppose your methods now when the children are thriving?" It was an excellent question, Emily had been so focused on the immediate confrontation that she hadn't fully considered William's underlying motivation. Control, perhaps, she wrote thoughtfully. Or vindication of his initial judgment of me. Ethan's response was more direct. He regrets rejecting you. Now he wants to prove he was right to do so. The insight struck Emily as remarkably perceptive. If William could demonstrate that her teaching methods were flawed or inappropriate, it would justify his original assessment of her character. His recent apology and apparent change of heart would be revealed as a momentary lapse in judgment, rather than a fundamental error. "Will you come to dinner tomorrow?" she wrote, changing the subject to the more immediate concern. Ethan hesitated, then wrote, "If you want me there, yes. But I won't hide what I think of your teaching." Emily smiled, touched by his loyalty. "I wouldn't want you to. Your display stand is proof enough of your support." They returned to the festival with renewed purpose, though Emily remained preoccupied with thoughts of the coming confrontation. William Blackwood had thrown down an unexpected challenge, one that threatened not just her teaching methods, but the place she had carved for herself in Oakridge Valley. That night, in her room above Henderson's store, Emily carefully reviewed her teaching notes and student progress records. If she was to defend her methods to a state education representative, she would need more than enthusiasm. She would need evidence. The sound of pebbles against her window drew her attention around midnight. Looking out, she saw Ethan standing. Below, a lantern in hand, she quickly descended the back stairs to meet him. "What's wrong?" she wrote on her ever-present slate. "Just returned from the schoolhouse," he wrote back, his expression grave. "Someone broke in. Your teaching materials are missing." Emily's blood ran cold. "Missing, all of them?" He nodded grimly. "Your alphabet cards, hand sign illustrations, reading progress records, even the display stand I made, all gone." "Did you alert the sheriff?" "Left a note at his office, but the festival means he won't see it until morning." Emily leaned against the staircase railing, her mind racing. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. With her materials gone and the state education official arriving tomorrow, she would have no evidence to support her teaching methods. It would be her word against William Blackwood's, the quiet former mail-order bride against the respected mine foreman. "This is my fault," Ethan wrote, his face shadowed with guilt. "I should have brought the display stand home instead of leaving it at the school." Emily shook her head firmly. "Not your fault, but we need to act quickly." She considered their options before writing decisively. "We'll need to recreate everything before Monday's board meeting." Ethan's eyes widened. "All of it? That's impossible. Not if we work together." She outlined her plan rapidly. "You rebuild the display stand. I'll recreate the essential teaching cards. We can gather student testimonials tomorrow after church. Margaret can help with the progress records." Ethan studied her face, noting her determination. Finally he wrote, "You won't let him win." "No," Emily replied simply. "I won't. Not when the children's education is at stake." His expression softened as he reached out to touch the wooden pendant he had carved for her, still hanging at her throat. The gesture was tender, questioning. Emily caught his hand and held it against the pendant, then against her heart. No written words were necessary to convey her answer. Whatever challenges William Blackwood had set in motion, they would face them together. As Ethan departed to begin work on rebuilding the display stand, Emily returned to her room with renewed determination. The theft of her teaching materials was a desperate move, one that revealed how threatened William felt by her methods. But in attempting to silence her, he had underestimated the strength she had found in Oakridge Valley. The quiet woman he had rejected now had a voice, one that would not be easily silenced. Sunday dawned clear and cold, with frost outlining every leaf and twig in silver. Emily dressed with particular care for church, selecting her second-best dress, a forest green that complemented her complexion, and arranging her hair in a modest but flattering style. The wooden pendant from Ethan remained around her neck, though she tucked it discreetly beneath her collar. Some battles were best fought subtly. The church service proceeded as usual, with Reverend Thompson delivering a sermon on integrity that seemed particularly pertinent given recent events. Emily noticed Gregory Sullivan immediately, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and an air of self-importance, seated prominently beside Eleanor Blackwood. William occupied the pew behind them, his expression unreadable as his gaze met Emily's. Across the sanctuary, after the service, as congregation members gathered on the church steps, Emily approached Margaret. "Someone broke into the schoolhouse," she said quietly. "All my teaching materials are gone." Margaret's eyes widened. "Gone? But your presentation is tomorrow." "Exactly." "I believe it was deliberate." Her colleague's shock transformed into indignation. "William Blackwood, it has to be. He mentioned Sullivan's visit to me yesterday, suggesting we present a more traditional classroom during the inspection." She shook her head disgustedly. "I told him your methods were getting exceptional results, but he dismissed me," said State. "Officials care more about form than function." Emily nodded, unsurprised by this confirmation of her suspicions. "We're recreating the essential materials. Can you help?" "Of course. I'll come this afternoon with my records of the children's progress." "Thank you. We'll meet at Ethan's workshop. It's safer than the schoolhouse." Emily paused, noticing Eleanor Blackwood approaching with the state education official in tow. "Margaret, this is Mr. Sullivan. We're invited to dinner at the Blackwood house today. Mr. Sullivan, may I present Miss Margaret Winters, our head teacher," Eleanor said smoothly, completing the introduction. Sullivan bowed slightly. "A pleasure, Miss Winters. I look forward to observing your school tomorrow. Mrs. Blackwood speaks highly of the progress you've made with limited resources." "Much of that progress is due to Miss Barrett's innovative methods," Margaret replied pointedly. Yes, Mrs. Blackwood mentioned something about this." Sullivan's gaze shifted to Emily, assessing. "I understand you developed some sort of manual communication system, a complementary approach to literacy instruction," Emily clarified, "using hand gestures to reinforce letter recognition and phonics." Sullivan's eyebrows rose skeptically. "Interesting, though I must say, in my 30 years of educational supervision, I've found that tried and true methods generally yield the best results. Sometimes innovation builds upon tradition rather than replacing it," Emily suggested. "I'd be happy to demonstrate how the approaches work together." "Indeed you shall at dinner," Eleanor interjected cheerfully. 3 o'clock, ladies. And, Miss Barrett, do bring your friend Mr. Mason as promised. Gregory has expressed particular interest in meeting him." Sullivan's expression registered surprise, but he nodded politely. "Yes, quite interested. Mrs. Blackwood tells me he's a craftsman of considerable skill." Emily thanked them and excused herself, aware of William watching the exchange from a distance. His face betrayed concern at his mother's evident enthusiasm for including Ethan in the gathering. At Ethan's workshop, Emily found him already hard at work on a new display stand. Wood shavings covered the floor, and the scent of fresh-cut pine filled the air. He looked up as she entered, his face lighting with a smile that quickly turned questioning when he noted her formal attire. "Church," she explained, writing on their slate. "Met the education official. He's exactly as William described, traditional, skeptical, but Mrs. Blackwood seems determined to be fair." Ethan nodded, returning to his careful measurements. Emily took a moment to admire his craftsmanship, the precision of his cuts, the steady confidence of his hands. Where others might see limitation in his deftness, she recognized how it had honed his other senses to remarkable acuity. His fingers detected imperfections in wood that most eyes would miss. His concentration, undistracted by sound, allowed For exceptional detail work. We're invited to dinner at the Blackwoods today, she wrote when he paused. Sullivan will be there. Ethan's hands stilled. He wiped them on a cloth before taking the chalk. Is that wise? Won't William use it against us? His mother arranged it. I believe she's trying to ensure a fair hearing. He considered this, skepticism evident in his expression. Why would Eleanor Blackwood support you against her son? Emily had wondered. The same thing. She seems to value education genuinely, and perhaps... She hesitated before adding, perhaps she recognizes that her son was wrong about me. Ethan's eyes softened as he looked at her. No one who truly knows you could think otherwise. The sentiment, so simply expressed, touched Emily deeply. As if realizing the intimacy of the moment, Ethan cleared his throat and gestured to the partially completed display stand. It will be ready by tomorrow, he wrote. Different design, better, than before, folds for transport. Emily smiled at his practical approach. I should start redrawing the alphabet cards. They worked side by side in comfortable silence. Ethan crafting the wooden frame, Emily recreating the visual teaching aids that had proven so effective with her students. Around noon, Margaret arrived with her meticulous records of student progress, and the three of them continued their preparations with shared purpose. By mid-afternoon, they had accomplished more than Emily had dared hope. The new display stand was nearly complete, featuring an ingenious folding design that improved upon the original. Most of the essential teaching cards had been recreated, and Margaret's records provided concrete evidence of the children's advancement under the new methods. We should prepare for dinner, Emily wrote reluctantly, aware of the time. Ethan glanced down at his sawdust-covered clothes and nodded. They agreed to meet at the town square in 30 minutes, giving them both time to change. When he appeared at their meeting place, Emily was struck anew by his handsome appearance. He had trimmed his beard and donned a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. The nervousness in his eyes as he approached made him seem suddenly vulnerable, despite his imposing presence. You look very distinguished, she wrote, offering reassurance. He smiled, his tension visibly easing as he offered her his arm for the walk to the Blackwood house. Eleanor Blackwood greeted them with genuine warmth, ushering them into a well-appointed parlour where Sullivan was already engaged in conversation with Margaret. William stood by the fireplace, his posture stiff, as he acknowledged their arrival with a curt nod. Mr. Mason, how delightful to meet you properly, Eleanor said, enunciating clearly to allow him to read her lips. William tells me you're creating quite a stir with your innovative furniture designs. Ethan glanced at Emily, who quickly explained the communication process to their hostess. Eleanor adapted immediately, procuring a small chalkboard and easel that she placed centrally on the side table. My late husband began to lose his hearing in his 50s, she explained. We found written communication quite effective, though. I never thought to create a proper system as Miss Barrett has done with the children. Sullivan watched this exchange with evident interest. Remarkable adaptation, he commented. Though, of course, Mr. Mason's situation is quite different from that of developing children. Adults with sensory limitations often compensate ingeniously. Emily noticed how carefully he distinguished between Ethan's deafness and the learning needs of normal children. Before she could respond, William interjected, "Precisely my concern, Sullivan. While accommodations for those with special needs are commendable, applying such methods to all children seems inappropriate. Traditional phonics and recitation have served generations adequately. Yet our students' reading proficiency has improved. 30% since implementing Miss Barrett's methods," Margaret countered. Children who struggled with traditional approaches are now reading at or above grade level. William waved this away. Temporary novelty effect. Children respond to any new approach initially. The question is whether these results can be sustained and whether they truly prepare students for higher education. An excellent point, Sullivan agreed. Educational fads come and go, but fundamental strategies endure for good reason. Ethan picked up the chalk and wrote in his elegant hand, "Is improvement a fad? Children learning better than before. This is success, not novelty." Sullivan read the message with raised eyebrows. "Forgive me, Mr. Mason, but with all due respect, carpentry and pedagogy are rather different disciplines." Ethan's jaw tightened, but he wrote calmly, "Both require understanding how people learn. My customers can't tell me what they need. I must observe, adapt, find solutions that work for them." "A fair point," Eleanor interjected. "Shall we move to the dining room? Cook has prepared a lovely roast." The strategic seating arrangement placed Emily between Sullivan and Eleanor, with Ethan across from them. William and Margaret occupied the table ends, creating a balanced dynamic that prevented any one perspective from dominating. As the first course was served, Eleanor skillfully guided the conversation toward neutral topics: the region's history, Sullivan's previous travels, the upcoming winter weather predictions. By the time the main course arrived, the atmosphere had relaxed considerably, allowing Eleanor to return to educational matters with subtle diplomacy. "Gregory, I understand from your previous comments that you favor traditional methods, yet surely results matter more than the particular approach." Sullivan dabbed his mouth with a napkin before responding. "Results certainly matter, Eleanor, but consistency across schools is equally important. State standards exist to ensure all children receive comparable education, regardless of location. But children aren't comparable," Emily said quietly. "They learn differently. Some through hearing, some through seeing, some through doing. A romantic notion, Miss Barrett, but impractical for systematic education. Teachers cannot create individual methods for each child." "Not individual methods," Emily clarified, "but approaches are flexible enough to engage different learning styles simultaneously," William cut in. "The practical concern, Sullivan, is whether such unorthodox methods will negatively affect our school's standing and funding." "A valid concern," Sullivan acknowledged. "The state committee favors schools that demonstrate adherence to established curriculum guidelines." Emily felt the conversation slipping toward William's perspective. She glanced at Ethan, drawing strength from his steady gaze before continuing. "Mr. Sullivan, may I ask what evidence you would find compelling? If the children demonstrate superior progress under a combined approach, would that merit consideration?" Sullivan considered this. "Empirical evidence is always relevant, though implementation feasibility remains a concern. Your methods require specialized training, I presume." "Less than you might think," Margaret interjected. "I learned the basic hand signs in a single afternoon. The children mastered them even more quickly." "Intriguing," Sullivan murmured, his rigid certainty showing the first signs of wavering. As dessert was served, Eleanor guided the conversation to a crucial question. "Gregory, if you were to observe definitive benefits from Miss Barrett's methods tomorrow, would you be open to recommending them for pilot implementation elsewhere?" Sullivan's mustache twitched as he contemplated his response. "If, and I stress if, the results prove significant and replicable, I would consider mentioning the approach in my report. However," he added firmly, "I must see concrete evidence, not merely enthusiastic testimony." "That seems entirely fair," Eleanor concluded, effectively closing the educational discussion on a note of cautious possibility. After dinner, the party returned to the parlor for coffee. Emily found herself momentarily alone with William as the others moved ahead. "This changes nothing," he said quietly. "Sullivan is being polite, but he'll never endorse your methods officially." Emily met his gaze directly. "Why does this matter so much to you, Mr. Blackwood?" Is it truly about educational standards or something more personal? A muscle twitched in his jaw. I want what's best for this town. As do I. Which makes me wonder why someone would remove teaching materials from a locked schoolhouse before. An important evaluation. William's expression remained impassive, but she noticed his knuckles whitening as he gripped his coffee cup. A serious accusation, Miss Barrett. I hope you have evidence before suggesting such misconduct. The timing speaks for itself. But rest assured, Mr. Blackwood, the presentation will proceed as planned. His eyes narrowed slightly. You seem very confident for someone who arrived in Oak Ridge, rejected and friendless just months ago. Perhaps that speaks to how much has changed for both of us. Further conversation was prevented by Eleanor calling them to join the group. For the remainder of the evening, William maintained a polite distance, though Emily felt his attention like a physical presence whenever she spoke with Sullivan or Ethan. As the gathering concluded, Sullivan approached Emily with unexpected cordiality. I look forward to observing your methods in action tomorrow, Miss Barrett. While I maintain healthy skepticism, I pride myself on objective assessment. That's all I ask, Emily replied, gratified by this small victory. Outside, as Ethan escorted Emily back toward town, the night air was crisp with approaching winter. Stars blazed overhead in a cloudless sky, their light casting soft shadows along the path. How did it go? Ethan wrote when they paused at a scenic overlook above Oak Ridge. I could follow some conversations by reading lips, but not all. Emily summarized the dinner's key developments, ending with Sullivan's promise of objective evaluation. It's more than I hoped for, but less than we need. William remains determined to discredit my methods. Ethan's expression grew serious as he wrote, Tomorrow will determine everything. Yes, Emily agreed, though we've done all we can to prepare. He hesitated, then wrote with careful deliberation, Whatever happens, you've already changed Oak Ridge. Children sign to each other across the schoolyard. Parents learn from their little ones, a language of silence spreading through a town that valued only noise. He paused, then added, You've changed me too. Emily looked up from the slate to find him watching her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. In the starlight, his eyes reflected a depth of feeling that required no written translation. Impulsively, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Ethan caught her hand gently, turning it to press a kiss against her palm, a gesture so tender it brought tears to her eyes. No chalk or slate was needed to communicate what passed between them in that moment. Under the vast Tennessee sky, the quiet schoolteacher and the deaf carpenter found a perfect harmony in their shared silence. As they walked back to town, Emily's mind turned to tomorrow's confrontation. Whatever William Blackwood had planned, whatever obstacles Sullivan might raise, she knew with sudden clarity that she had already found what she truly sought when she journeyed to Oak Ridge Valley. Not just employment or community, but understanding, the recognition of her worth exactly as she was. With Ethan beside her and the children's needs foremost in her mind, Emily prepared to face the public reckoning that would determine not just her professional future, but the educational path of a generation of Oak Ridge children. Monday morning dawned with steel-gray skies, threatening snow, unusual for October in Tennessee. Emily stood at her window, watching as the first delicate flakes began to swirl against the glass. The unseasonable weather seemed fitting for a day that would determine so much. She dressed with particular care in her best outfit, a tailored navy dress with subtle embroidery at the collar, preserved for special occasions. Around her neck, Ethan's wooden pendant hung openly now, a declaration of both her affection and her principles. She touched it briefly, drawing strength from the smooth wood that had been shaped by his hands. The small mirror above her washstand reflected a woman transformed from the timid mail-order bride who had arrived in Oak Ridge Valley 4 months earlier. Her posture was straighter, her gaze more direct, her expression quietly confident. The town hadn't changed her essential nature. She remained as introspective and measured as ever, but it had helped her discover the power in her quietness. Rather than seeing it as a flaw to overcome, Margaret arrived at her door just after 7, her expression resolute. "Ready for battle?" she asked, attempting lightness despite the tension evident in her posture. "As ready as possible," Emily replied, pulling on her woolen coat. "Has Sullivan arrived at the school yet?" "Not yet. Mrs. Henderson said he was having breakfast at the hotel. He'll observe morning lessons before the board meeting at noon." Margaret handed Emily a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Fresh ginger cookies. Mrs. Henderson baked them especially for you this morning. Said you might need fortification." Emily smiled at this small gesture of community support. "Please thank her for me." They walked to the schoolhouse together, their boots leaving paired tracks in the light dusting of snow. The pale morning light cast long shadows across the valley, and smoke rose in straight columns from chimneys throughout town. Even this early, Oak Ridge was stirring. Miners heading to the early shift, shopkeepers preparing for business, children peering excitedly at the unexpected snow. Inside the schoolhouse, they found Ethan already setting up the new display stand in a corner, positioning it for maximum visibility during the afternoon presentation. The craftsmanship was even finer than the original, with smoothly rotating panels and precisely fitted joints. He had clearly worked through the night to complete it, evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "It's beautiful," Emily said aloud. Forgetting momentarily that he couldn't hear her, Ethan looked up, reading her expression, if not her words. He smiled and reached for the slate they kept handy. "Better than before," he wrote, "like many things in Oak Ridge." His gaze held hers meaningfully, and Emily felt a rush of gratitude for his steady presence. Whatever happened today, they had already created something valuable together, a way of communicating that transcended conventional limitations. The children began arriving soon after, stomping snow from their boots and chattering excitedly about the unexpected weather. They greeted Miss Emily with affection, many of them automatically using the hand signs they had learned alongside their spoken words. "Is it true a big, important man is watching us today?" asked Sarah Miller, a bright-eyed 7-year-old who had blossomed under Emily's teaching. "Yes," Emily confirmed, helping the child with her coat buttons. "Mr. Sullivan is visiting from the State Education Department. He wants to see how well you're learning." "Will we show him our hand-talking?" Thomas Porter inquired eagerly, demonstrating by spelling his name with quick, practiced movements. "Absolutely. Today is about demonstrating everything you've learned." Emily organized the classroom with particular care, arranging the reading materials and ensuring each child had slate and chalk. The alphabet cards, hastily recreated over the weekend, were displayed prominently, and student work samples lined the walls. She wanted Sullivan to see not just the methods, but the results they had achieved. By the time Sullivan arrived, accompanied by William Blackwood, the classroom was in full productive swing. Emily led her young students through reading exercises incorporating both traditional methods and hand signs, while Margaret worked with the older children on arithmetic. The familiar routine calmed Emily's nerves, allowing her to focus on the children rather than the scrutiny they were under. Sullivan observed from the back of the room, his expression inscrutable as he made occasional notes in a small, leather-bound journal. His substantial frame and formal attire made him stand out starkly in the modest schoolhouse. William stood beside him, periodically leaning in to whisper comments that Emily couldn't hear, but could well imagine. The tension of being evaluated would normally have made her nervous, but the children's enthusiastic participation steadied her. After observing silently for nearly an hour, Sullivan approached Emily's group. "Might I ask a few questions, Miss Barrett?" "Of course, Mr. Sullivan," he turned to the children. "Can someone explain why you use these hand movements while reading?" Without hesitation, young James Wilson raised his hand. "It helps us remember the letters better, sir. When I forget how a word sounds, I can spell it with my hands and then I remember." "And you find this easier than simply sounding out the words?" "We do that too," Sarah interjected, her small voice surprisingly firm. "But sometimes when letters look too much alike, like B and D, the hand shapes help us tell them apart." Sullivan nodded thoughtfully, his bushy eyebrows drawn together in concentration. "Miss Barrett, would you demonstrate how you teach a new letter?" Emily selected a slate and wrote the letter Q in large, clear strokes. "We begin with the written form," she explained, "then add the sound, KW as in quiet or question." She demonstrated the hand sign, forming a Q shape with her fingers. The children practice all three elements together. And for children who struggle with traditional methods, they often connect more easily with the movement, Emily explained, gesturing to a small boy in the back row. "Samuel struggled with letter recognition until we added the hand signs. Now he's reading at grade level. Some children learn primarily through seeing, others through hearing, still others through doing. This approach engages all three." Sullivan watched as the children demonstrated, spelling simple words with synchronized movements and sounds. Their evident comfort with the technique and obvious pride in their accomplishment seemed to impress him despite his reservations. "Most interesting," he murmured, before returning to his observation position. The morning proceeded smoothly, with Emily conducting her regular lessons while conscious of the evaluation taking place. She noticed how William's expression darkened whenever Sullivan showed interest or approval in her methods. His investment in her failure was becoming increasingly apparent, though his motivations remained complex. Was it truly concern for educational standards or wounded pride from their initial meeting? By 11:30, as the children prepared for their midday meal, she felt cautiously optimistic about Sullivan's assessment. "Your students are certainly engaged," Sullivan commented as the children filed out to the playground. "And their reading progress appears accelerated compared to typical first-year students." "Thank you," Emily replied. "They've worked very hard." "Yes, well," he cleared his throat, adjusting his waistcoat. "The board meeting begins at noon. I understand you'll be making a formal presentation." "That's correct. We've prepared demonstrations of both the methods and the outcomes." Sullivan nodded. "Very good. I shall reserve further comment until then." As he departed with William, Margaret approached Emily, her expression hopeful. He seemed impressed with the children's progress. "Perhaps," Emily agreed cautiously, arranging materials for her presentation. "But William had plenty of opportunity to influence him. We won't know for certain until the formal assessment." While the children ate their midday meal under Margaret's supervision, Emily made final preparations for her presentation. Ethan had slipped away to the carpentry shop to retrieve the last components for the display, but promised to return before the board meeting began. His absence left an unexpected hollow in Emily's confidence. She had grown accustomed to his steady presence during challenges. At precisely noon, members of the school board began arriving. The meeting would take place in the schoolhouse itself, a practical choice given the demonstration nature of Emily's presentation. 5 board members in total, including William Blackwood as chairman, seated themselves at a table arranged at the front of the room. Sullivan took a position to their right, his official status separate from, but influential to the board's decision. Several parents had also come to observe, creating a sizable audience for what would normally have been a routine administrative meeting. Emily noticed Mrs. Blackwood among them, elegantly dressed and sitting with perfect posture near the front. The older woman nodded encouragingly when their eyes met. At 12:15, with no sign of Ethan, William called the meeting to order. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather today to discuss curriculum approaches at Oak Ridge School. As you know, Miss Barrett has implemented certain alternative methods that deviate from standard teaching practices. Today, she will present these methods, after which we'll hear Mr. Sullivan's professional assessment. He gestured toward Emily with a politeness that didn't reach his eyes. Miss Barrett, you may begin. Emily moved to the front of the room, conscious of all eyes upon her. Public speaking had never been her strength, ironically confirming William's initial assessment of her suitability as his wife. But in that moment, her focus remained on the children's well-being rather than her own discomfort. Distinguished board members, Mr. Sullivan, parents and friends, she began, her voice soft but clear in the hushed room. I came to Oak Ridge Valley just 4 months ago, seeking purpose after losing my home and livelihood in Charleston. What I found here was an opportunity to contribute meaningfully to the community through education. She directed their attention to the children's progress charts Margaret had carefully prepared. These records document reading proficiency before and after implementing the combined method. As you can see, overall literacy has improved 34%, with the most dramatic gains among students who previously struggled with traditional approaches. She walked them through specific examples. Samuel's transformation from frustrated non-reader to enthusiastic participant, Sarah's accelerated progress through more advanced texts, Thomas's newfound ability to help younger children with their reading. William cleared his throat, leaning forward with an expression of polite skepticism. While statistics are informative, Miss Barrett, they require context. Mr. Sullivan has expressed concern that these methods, while possibly yielding short-term improvements, may disadvantage students in the long term by deviating from standard educational practices. A valid concern, Emily acknowledged, meeting his gaze steadily. Which is why I've invited several students to demonstrate not only how they learn with this approach, but what they've achieved through it. She called forward 6 children, 3 from her group and 3 from Margaret's, who had volunteered to participate. They arranged themselves in a semicircle facing the board, their small faces serious with the responsibility they'd been given. These students represent various ages and abilities, Emily explained. Some took naturally to traditional reading methods, while others struggled. The complementary approach has benefited them all, though in different ways. For the next 20 minutes, the children demonstrated their reading abilities, explaining in their own words how the hand signs helped them recognize and remember letters. Even William found it difficult to maintain his skepticism in the face of such clear enthusiasm and proficiency. When young Samuel confidently read a passage that would have been incomprehensible to him just months earlier, several board members exchanged impressed glances. Most impressive, commented Mr. Thompson, the merchant who served as board treasurer. I must say, my grandson Jacob could barely identify his letters before Miss Barrett arrived. Now he reads to his little sister every evening. Other board members nodded, similarly swayed by the concrete evidence before them. Only William maintained his opposition, though Emily could see his position weakening as the presentation continued. While student engagement is certainly important, he argued, adjusting his tie nervously, we must consider Mr. Sullivan's professional assessment. The State Education Department provides our funding after all. Their standards must be our priority. All eyes turned to Sullivan, who tugged at his waistcoat thoughtfully. He looked at the children, still standing proudly at the front of the room, then back to his notes, then to Emily herself. I entered this evaluation with significant reservations about departing from established methodologies, he admitted, his deep voice filling the schoolhouse. However, the results demonstrated here are difficult to dismiss. The children's progress exceeds typical expectations for this academic period. A murmur of approval swept through the parent observers. Mrs. Porter squeezed her husband's hand, while Mrs. Henderson nodded vigorously in agreement. "That said," Sullivan continued, raising a cautionary finger, "I remain concerned about implementation feasibility on a broader scale. This approach requires teacher training beyond standard preparation." "If I may address that concern," Emily responded, "the basic hand signs can be learned in a single afternoon, as Margaret demonstrated. More importantly, they don't replace traditional methods, they enhance them. Teachers can incorporate as much or as little of the approach as suits their students' needs." She was about to elaborate when the door at the back of the schoolhouse opened with a creak that drew all eyes. Ethan entered, snow dusting his shoulders and hat, but he wasn't alone. Sheriff Davis accompanied him, his official presence immediately creating a stir among the attendees. Ethan's expression was grim but determined as they moved down the center. "Apologies for the interruption," Sheriff Davis announced, raising his hand for attention. "But Mr. Mason has brought something to my attention that bears directly on this meeting." William's face paled slightly as the sheriff approached the board table. Emily noticed how his hands gripped the edge, knuckles whitening under pressure. "During renovation work at the mining company office this morning, Mr. Mason discovered educational materials that had been reported missing from the schoolhouse," the sheriff continued, placing a familiar set of original alphabet cards on the table. "These materials were found in a locked cabinet in Mr. Blackwood's private office." Gasps and whispers filled the room as the implications became clear. Emily felt a curious mixture of vindication and sadness. William's opposition had run deeper than she'd realized. William rose abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. "This is preposterous. I had no knowledge of—" "Your key was used, William," the sheriff cut in firmly. "The cabinet bears your name, and only you have access. Mr. Mason was hired to build new shelving in that office, which is why he had a legitimate reason to be there this morning." Mrs. Blackwood stood from her observer position, her dignified bearing making the motion seem almost regal. "William Henry Blackwood," she said, her voice ringing with authority that silenced the room instantly. "Is this true?" Under his mother's unwavering gaze, William's composure crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. Red blotches appeared on his neck as he struggled to maintain dignity. "The methods are unsound," he insisted desperately, looking around for allies and finding none. "Sullivan would never have approved them if he'd understood the full context. I was protecting the school's funding, the town's reputation." "By stealing teaching materials?" Mr. Thompson asked incredulously. "By sabotaging Miss Barrett's presentation?" "She was meant to fail on her own merits," William exclaimed, gesturing toward Emily with uncharacteristic animation. "Her quietness, her unconventional ideas, these aren't qualities suited to Oak Ridge leadership. Yet they're precisely the qualities that have improved our children's education," Mrs. Porter interjected from the audience, standing to be heard. "My Lily reads 3 grades above her age now, thanks to Miss Barrett." Other parents murmured agreement, their collective support forming a shield around Emily that was more powerful than any argument she could have made herself. Sullivan cleared his throat loudly, the sound cutting through the growing tension. "In light of these disturbing developments, I believe the board should continue this discussion without me. My assessment will focus solely on educational outcomes, not personal conflicts." He fixed William with a disapproving stare. "Based on demonstrated results and student proficiency, I will be recommending Miss Barrett's methods for pilot implementation in other rural schools across the state." This announcement sent a wave of approval through the room. William sank back into his chair, defeat evident in every line of his posture. The man who had once dismissed Emily as too quiet for Oak Ridge now found himself silenced by the very community he had sought to lead. "I believe this calls for a vote," Mrs. Blackwood stated firmly, taking command of the situation with practiced ease. "Board members, do you support the continued implementation and development of Miss Barrett's teaching methods at Oakridge School?" One by one, the remaining 4 board members voted in favor. William, recognizing his isolation, abstained rather than oppose them directly, a final gesture of pride in the face of defeat. "The motion carries," Mrs. Blackwood declared, "and I believe my son needs to reconsider his position as board chairman given these revelations." William stood stiffly, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "That won't be necessary, Mother. I hereby resign, effective immediately." Without further comment, he strode from the schoolhouse back straight despite the circumstances, dignity in tatters, but pride still intact. In the aftermath of this dramatic departure, the meeting dissolved into informal discussion. Sullivan engaged Emily in detailed questions about implementing her methods more widely. His initial skepticism transformed into professional curiosity. Parents gathered around their children, expressing pride in their participation. Teachers from neighboring districts who had come to observe requested copies of Emily's teaching materials. Through it all, Ethan remained at the back of the room, a quiet presence whose timely discovery had ensured justice prevailed. His eyes followed Emily as she navigated the congratulations and questions, a pride in his gaze that matched her own sense of accomplishment. When she finally made her way to him, her eyes conveyed everything words could not. He smiled and wrote, "On the ever-present slate, your voice was heard today, loudly." Emily took the chalk and added beneath his words, "Our voice. This victory belongs to both of us." His fingers brushed hers as he accepted the slate back, the brief contact conveying more than pages of written conversation ever could. The weeks following the board meeting brought significant changes to Oakridge Valley. The early snow had been a harbinger of an unusually cold winter, with drifts piling against buildings and icicles hanging from eaves like crystal decorations. Despite the harsh weather, the town seemed warmer somehow, the community drawn closer by shared purpose. William Blackwood, unable to face the judgment of those he had considered beneath his station, departed for Kentucky to oversee his company's mining interests there. The announcement came through a formal letter rather than in person, a final testament to his inability to admit error directly. Eleanor Blackwood, far from following her son into self-imposed exile, embraced a new role as school board chairwoman. Her organizational skills and social connections proved invaluable for educational advancement throughout the region. She became an unexpected ally and friend to Emily, their mutual respect transcending the awkward circumstances of their initial connection. "My son's greatest flaw," Eleanor confided during a planning session for school improvements, "was his inability to recognize that quiet waters often run the deepest. He mistook volume for value, just as his father did. It's a family failing I'm determined to correct in my remaining years." Sullivan's endorsement brought state recognition to Oakridge School, along with increased funding and resources. His official report, copies of which circulated proudly through town, praised the innovative dual-modality approach pioneered by Miss Barrett and recommended its adoption for students struggling with traditional methods. Teachers from neighboring districts began visiting to observe and learn Emily's methods, creating an unexpected professional exchange that benefited all involved. Margaret thrived in this collaborative environment, her confidence growing as she helped demonstrate techniques she had once questioned. As winter settled fully over the Tennessee mountains, Emily found herself in a position she could never have imagined when she first arrived. Respected, valued, and deeply connected to the community that had initially rejected her. Children greeted her with hand signs as well as words when she walked through town. Parents sought her advice on educational matters. Even the miners tipped their hats respectfully when they passed her on the street. Throughout these changes, Ethan remained her steadfast companion. Their relationship deepened through shared experiences and quiet evenings of written conversation by the stove in his workshop. He taught her about woodworking. She introduced him to her favorite books. Together, they developed new signs for concepts that mattered in their daily lives, creating a private language within the language they already shared. On a snowy December evening, Ethan invited her to his workshop for a special unveiling. When she arrived, she found the space transformed. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the normally practical workspace. A small fire crackled in the stove, and the usual scents of sawdust and varnish were complemented by something sweeter, cinnamon and apples warming on the stovetop. In the center of the room stood a covered piece of furniture, its shape and size, hidden beneath a clean white cloth. Ethan himself had dressed for the occasion in a pressed shirt and clean jacket, his sandy hair neatly combed. "What is this?" she wrote on their slate, curious and touched by the evident planning. Ethan's eyes sparkled with excitement as he removed the covering to reveal an elegant writing desk with multiple compartments. The wood gleamed with careful polishing, its surface inlaid with a subtle design that, upon closer inspection, revealed alphabet symbols and their corresponding hand signs. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Dovetail joints fitted so perfectly. They were nearly invisible. Wood grain matched across surfaces to create continuous patterns, every edge and corner smoothed to satin perfection. "For your book," he wrote, "the teaching manual Sullivan requested." Emily ran her fingers over the beautiful craftsmanship, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness behind it. Sullivan had indeed suggested she document her methods for wider implementation, but she hadn't mentioned this to Ethan. "Margaret told me," he explained, reading her puzzled expression. "This desk is designed specifically for writing and organizing teaching materials." Emily explored the custom features. Drawers sized perfectly for lesson cards, compartments for different categories of teaching aids, a sloped writing surface with a built-in inkwell. One drawer contained fresh paper, pens, and ink. Everything she would need to begin her documentation project. Another held a surprise, a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "It's perfect," she whispered, forgetting momentarily that he couldn't hear her. Ethan stepped closer and took her hands in his. His work-roughened fingers were gentle against her skin, warm and slightly calloused from years of crafting beauty from raw materials. For a long moment, they stood connected in the lantern light, no slate or chalk needed for what passed between them. Then, with deliberate care, he released one of her hands to reach into his pocket. From it, he withdrew a small wooden box, similar to the one that had held her pendant months earlier. This box was even more finely crafted, its lid carved with intertwining leaves that framed her initials. Emily's heart quickened as he opened it to reveal a ring carved from pale maple wood, inlaid with a delicate pattern of darker walnut that echoed the design on the desk. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. The ring appeared delicate, yet was clearly structured for durability. The two types of wood joined so seamlessly they seemed to flow into each other. She understood immediately that this was no ordinary gift. It was a question, a hope, a future offered without the need for spoken words. With hands that trembled slightly, she formed the sign for yes, before he could even write the question. Joy transformed Ethan's face as he slipped the wooden ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly as she knew it would, crafted by hands that understood precision and care, designed for a woman whose quiet strength had changed an entire community. In that moment, as snow fell softly outside the workshop windows, Emily Barrett reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this place. She had come to Oak Ridge Valley seeking security as a mail-order bride, only to be rejected for being too quiet. That rejection, painful as it had set her on a path to discover her true voice, not one that shouted to be heard, but one that spoke through meaningful action and genuine connection. That night, walking back to her room above Henderson's store, soon to be her former residence once she and Ethan married, Emily paused to look out over Oak Ridge Valley. The town lay peaceful under its blanket of snow, windows glowing with lamplight, smoke rising from chimneys against the star-filled sky. It had transformed, just as she had, finding value in quiet strength rather than meaningless noise. Spring would bring a wedding, summer would see her teaching manual published, and autumn would mark a year since her arrival in Oak Ridge. But those were future chapters in a story still unfolding. For now, her hand touching the wooden ring that symbolized all she had found, Emily embraced the precious present. A love built on understanding, a community transformed by acceptance, and a quiet voice that had finally perfectly been heard. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.